Today we're taking a look at 3 different red dot optics at 3 different price points on Sunday GUNDAY. What's going on, everyone? Back with another episode of Stuff and Things with a question for you. What is it that you look for when you're in the market for a new red dot? Well, for starters, everything that you're about to hear in this video is all my personal opinion. Much like buying a gun, everyone has their own preferred styles and tastes, and the same thing applies to red dots and other optics. Everything you're about to hear is coming from my perspective. I'm a guy who's just into guns. I'm not a professional. I don't have military or law enforcement experience. I'm just a dude who's been hunting and shooting for a long time, and it's become a pretty big hobby of mine. So I went into my safe and I picked 3 different optics from kind of all over the spectrum. I didn't want to go super high end or super low end, so I got stuff kind of right in the sweet spot. Now this is just going to be a broad overview of each of these options. If you want to get into the hardcore specs like the battery life, the type of glass that's used in them, the waterproofing, the dust ratings, the different options that you can get when picking these up. If you want to learn about any of that stuff, I will leave links to the specifications and where you can buy them down in the description. So instead of slamming you with specs, this is just going to be what it's like to pick this up and shoot it from a normal guy's perspective. Up first and starting from the lower end of the price spectrum is the Sightmark Ultra Shot Plus. This is one of the newest offerings from Sightmark, and you can pick them up for about 100 to 120 bucks. Here it is off of the rifle. As you can see, it has pretty much an all metal body construction. There is a little bit of plastic on this back piece here, and then on the reticle selection on the bottom. It uses one of these quick detach levers right onto a Picatinny rail. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Here's an idea of what the reticle looks like. As I said, there's a selector switch in the back here, so there's 4 different options to pick from. Here's 1, 2, a standard red dot, 3, and 4. There's also different brightness modes just like all of these here. There we go on the lowest setting, bump it up to the highest, and then back down to the middle. This one also has the option to go to a green style reticle, again with the different reticle options. To put this back on the rifle, you simply put it where you had it zeroed at before and push down on the lever. Now from an average dude's perspective, what are the pros and cons of this thing? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is price. Obviously, it's the cheapest in the bunch. I do like the quick attach and detach. It might not be the most accurate thing if you're taking it off and on all the time. However, I found that it holds at zero pretty well. The features of it being the different reticles and the color selections, that isn't really for me. However, if you're into something a little bit different and flashy, I guess it's cool to have different options, different colors, things like that. The different colors can be used in different lighting scenarios. Like I said, I'm just a normal dude out there shooting at targets, so that's not really a huge pro for me. A lot of people are gonna ask about the accuracy of this when it comes to switching the reticles. Because you're actually moving something inside of here and the whole thing is moving out of the frame, you would think that after a while it would kind of lose its zero. The hell was that? You would think after a while it would lose its zero, however I haven't found that to be the case. All of these optics, when shooting them, it was all just combat zeroed. I was standing out in a field, no real tools. I just put these optics on however they needed to be put on to their respective guns, and then I zeroed it in to match the iron sights. I was shooting at about 50 yards at normal toxic target silhouette, so nothing out of the ordinary. So does changing the reticle really throw off the zero? Probably if you're zeroed from a bench. However, the way I did it, the way I set up all of my guns, I didn't notice anything. I've used an older version of this sight in the past, flicking the reticle back and forth all the time. Never really lost zero, but then again, I'm not shooting really tight groups at 100 yards. So when it comes to actually shooting this thing, one of the big pros that I prefer this over the others is how big the glass is. You have this big opening right here, so when you're going from a steady position up into shooting, it's really easy to find where the dot is and put some rounds down. So pros, I like the attachment system, I like the wide field of view, and cons, I don't really care for the different reticles and the different color selection. Don't forget the main pro though, this thing is only about 100 bucks. Now let's take a look at our other options. Next up, we have the Vortex SPARC AR. Now if you're into guns and you've been doing research for a while, this thing probably looks really familiar. A ton of guys run this optic and it's because it is pretty good. Right now the SPARC is coming in at about $200, so it's a little bit more expensive than the Sightmark, but still cheaper than the next option. It is currently rocking this silicone type of cover. I could take it off, but it does have these lens caps, so when it's sitting in the safe, I put them on to keep dust off of it. This reticle is going to be a little bit harder to show you guys, and I will tell you why in a little bit. There it is. Simple red dot this time. This has a few more brightness level adjustments than the Sightmark, which you can get to with these buttons right up here in the front. Other than that, it's pretty simple, just the two buttons, one to turn it on, up and down brightness, and the other one to turn it off. So the pros and cons of the SPARC AR, the first thing that I would chalk up as a pro is actually the price point. Coming in at just under $200, there's a lot of value in this little optic. Just holding it in your hand alone, you can tell that it's higher quality than the Sightmark. Another pro would be if you look at the battery door in the front here, you can probably tell that it runs off of a single AAA. The Sightmark, on the other hand, I believe runs off a CR123 or a battery similar to that, so it's not something that you're probably going to have lying around your house. You could also talk about the silicone cover being a pro. It definitely keeps the lenses protected when not in use. A pro to this one, and something that I actually didn't mention about the Sightmark, is how you adjust the windage and the elevation. On the Sightmark, you're only going to be able to adjust it with an Allen key, whereas the SPARC, you saw there that I just unscrewed this cap. It has the adjustment down in here, but if you flip the cap around, this will actually double as a screwdriver, so you can put this in here, make your adjustments as needed, and then just thread this right back on. That's definitely a cool feature. It makes zeroing this thing pretty damn easy. When attaching this thing to a rail, you're going to need a torque screw. On the Sightmark, the way it comes off and on is definitely a pro. However, when I put something on a gun, I normally leave it on there for a while, so I don't really see this as a con. The reticle on this thing is definitely a lot cleaner. It can get a lot brighter than the other option. So what are the real cons to this thing? The first thing that I found that I didn't like about this thing was when I pulled it out of the box. I noticed right off the bat that it's heavy, a lot heavier than the other two options. Now, is that really a con? It's heavier than the other options, but the build quality feels really good. Again, it's personal preference. Under the protective cover, it is an all metal construction, so that can definitely add to the weight. It does feel really good, but I think it could be a little bit lighter. Another thing about this that I don't really care for is the buttons. It is nice that it's really simple. There's a bunch of different adjustments and everything, but they just don't feel good to me. Depending on where you have this thing set up on your gun, whether you have it closer to your iron sights or you have a magnifier or something like that in the way, these buttons can be a little bit hard to get to at times. They're rubberized and they are kind of clicky, however, I just feel like they could have been done a little bit better. That's me really nitpicking this thing though. Now, the main con, and what I was getting at when I said it's kind of hard to find the reticle on this thing, is that the sight picture on this thing is really small. As you can see, I can block the whole glass with pretty much just the tip of my finger. The reason why I don't like that is because when I'm pulling the gun up really quick, it does make it a little bit tricky to figure out where the dot is. On the Sightmark, you got a nice wide piece of glass so you can see all your peripherals when looking through it. This, however, gives you kind of tunnel vision. When you're coming up on this thing quickly, if you're not already looking at your target, it can be a little bit tricky to figure out where the red dot is sometimes. While the picture is small when looking through this thing, a pro to that is that it's really slim. It's the Vortex SPARC AR, so obviously it's made for ARs. It kind of fits with the whole line of the gun. And then again, if you're practicing with what you have, it really shouldn't be an issue. The more and more I practice with this thing, the quicker I could get on target, and I was putting shots down pretty accurately and pretty quickly as well. That's a basic overview on the Vortex. Let's move on to the final option. If you watched last week's episode of Sunday GUNDAY, you already saw what this is. This is our third option, the Trijicon MRO. I've definitely shot this option more than the others, and if you want to see me shooting this Vector with the MRO mounted on it, I will leave a link to that video right here. So here we have the Trijicon MRO, the top dog for this video. This specific optic is coming in at around $450. This also comes in a ton of different options, so if you go down and check the link in the description, you can see all the different types of options that they offer. So this red dot is a forged aluminum construction. It doesn't really feel like metal to me though. It's almost coated with a rubberized type of material. I'm not sure what they call that, but I actually prefer this over the other two options. To turn this thing on, you just spin the dial on the top. You can crank it all the way to the left for max brightness. And this one should be a little bit easier. There's the red dot that we're working with. Again, like the SPARC, there's no different reticles to choose from. It's just a simple red dot. It's red, it stays red, it works, and it's effective. If you haven't figured it out by now, I like simplicity because simple works. The controls to zero this thing are on the top and the side. There's no caps with neat little screwdrivers on the other side of them. However, if you take a spent casing, you can definitely adjust that with the back of a 9. This doesn't run off a really convenient battery like the AAA. I believe it's some type of watch battery found just underneath this cap. However, that's not really a huge deal to me. This is currently mounted on a riser. Like I said, this thing comes in a bunch of different options, with risers, without them. Go check it out for yourself. Now, what are the pros and cons of the Trijicon MRO? Well, for starters, the first thing that I hit the SPARC for was for its weight. This thing is light, a lot lighter. The form factor is roughly the same size. I'm not really sure what kind of electrics they have going on in the SPARC. This, as you can see, is hollow. Everything is housed in the top. This just seems like a better, more well thought out package. Everything is nice and streamlined, keeping it pretty damn light. A pro that I gave the SPARC over the Sightmark was the dot. this dot is better than both of them. The dot is really crisp and clean, and I believe it has more adjustments than the Spark as well. Now when it comes to actually shooting this thing, if you watch the video of me with this whole package here, you'll know that I'm very, very comfortable with it. I can shoot this thing fast, slow, up close, at distances. Transitions are super easy and quick, and that's mainly because of the glass on this thing. This is pretty much a happy medium between the Sightmark and the Vortex. As you can see, my finger doesn't really cover up the glass completely, so it's definitely a little bit bigger than the Spark, but it's not quite as big as the Sightmark. What's good about that is that it opens up your peripheral view a little bit more, but it doesn't have that really large form factor like the Sightmark does. You could throw this thing on an AR and it would still look right at home. Now the cons of this thing, to be honest, I'm gonna be stretching to find some. I guess you could say the price point really isn't ideal. However, if you look at the specs of this compared to the other two, then that's where your money's at. There's just a lot of things that this optic does better than the other two, but like I said, I'm not gonna slam you with those specs. Another con, I guess, would be the battery. Like I said, that doesn't really bother me that it's not a common battery like a AAA. And if you go and look at the specs on this thing, you can leave this on for a long time and the battery's not gonna run dead. What else could I say that's really bad about this thing? It's not symmetrical. I don't know. There's really not anything else that's bad that I can say about this thing. So out of all the options, what do you think I would pick? Well, you can probably guess that I'm going with the Trijicon MRO. Much like anything you buy nowadays, the more money you put into it, the better quality you're gonna get, the longer it's gonna last, and probably the happier you're gonna be. If you have the cash, I would definitely recommend checking one of these out. But at the same time, if you're strapped for cash, you only have $200, you only have $100, I can safely recommend any of these options. I've shot them all, and like myself, I'm a normal dude. I'm not beating up my gear very often. They all work fine, and I'm pretty happy with all of them. So that's gonna be it for today. Now that you guys know my opinion on these three options, I'm curious, what would you pick? Let me know in the comments down below. I know I kind of breezed through all of these, so if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down there as well. I may not be an expert, but I've had my hands on a bunch of different options from $20 red dots all the way up to $1,000 EOTechs, so chances are I can give you my opinion on whatever you're looking at. If you're new to this channel, consider clicking subscribe. I make new videos every week, and that is it for today. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.